Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is, did Delhi get affected from being a metropolis after the revolt of 1857 and after revolts? Because if it would be affected, then the whole country can be affected because of that.
Well, what the main thing with Delhi has grown after 1947. It's really grown, huh? And the metropolis business has happened much later, of course, than the subject of this book. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great idea. I think we should be thinking of moving some of those things out. I mean, we should not be concentrating everything into Delhi, mainly for various other reasons, including quality of life in Delhi itself.
The broken script. We're all here, we've all gathered for this session. The session will be moderated by Priyanka Kothari. Priyanka has completed her BTech in cosmetology as part of her education. Right now, her full-time job, though, is being a supermom of 2 children. For over 10 years, she has been associated with CMCA, an NGO that teaches children about civic awareness. She is a part of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, an NGO that works for promotion of Indian art and culture in India and overseas. She also conducts creative writing and reading comprehension classes for boarding school entrances. Welcome, Priyanka. Thank you for joining us today. And now for the star of the show, our author. Our author has an unconditional love for the city of Delhi. That love, in particular for Shahjahanabad, has led her to write a PhD thesis on its cultural and intellectual life in the 19th century. Today, she seeks to raise awareness about the city's prehistoric precincts, mainly through her work for the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage that is intact. She is the author of Delhi 14 Historic Walks, Chandni Chowk, the Mughal city of New Delhi, and The Making of New Delhi and the Broken Script. Today she is going to discuss with us about her book, The Broken Script. I would like to request Priyanka to please escort Swapna ma'am to the stage. And before we begin the session, I would like to request all of you to put your phones on silent mode or switch them off. And if you must take a call, I'd request you to please step outside the hall and attend it. Thank you. Over to you, Priyanka.
Swapna, for accepting our invitation and coming for VLF. So let's begin right away from the beginning. And as you mentioned, you have an unconditional love for Delhi. You've written 4 books. 5 books and 2 in 2023 itself. I mean, you're a prolific writer also. What is that fascinates about Delhi?
Thank you, Priyanka. First of all, before I start, a huge thank you to the organizers of VLF. And it's just the kind of love that I've received here. I think this is the ideal, intimate size of LitFest, such a personal touch from all the organizers. These are people who love books.
So glad you appreciate it.
That's so lovely to see. And I must say, I'm coming back to Nagpur after 30 years. 30 years ago, I was here for a research trip. I was researching a book. I was researching actually at that stage, I was writing a different kind of PhD. So I was researching that. And it's lovely to be back in this city. But I love Delhi. I think that also has happened by accident. In the sense that, first and foremost, I love history. And I've lived all my adult life in Delhi. So when I moved to Delhi, I was a very young adult, and I liked one of the things that I loved to do, particularly when I was in college. I was studying history, but I also liked to go to visit old monuments and things. So I became very interested in that aspect of Delhi's history because it's very rich in these archaeological and architectural remains. So that kind of drew me to the study of Delhi, and I did other things also. I did my MPhil. I've been studying so long, I've forgotten to teach. I thought I would be a teacher, but I never got around to it because I was always studying. But so eventually, I just decided that I will write academically on Delhi also because I love the city so much. So I thought, chalo, इसी की हिस्ट्री के ऊपर लिखते हैं. And again, it brings me to this whole cycle of how as a historian does this. And I thought, let me write a book. I did not have any idea that I would, actually do it as a PhD thesis, but I did it eventually because it helps you to do the research nicely, gives you the support of other academic inputs, your supervisor, etc. So मैंने सोचा कि चलो ऐसे लिखते हैं. And once I wrote it, and I always write not for an academic audience, a readership, I write for a general readership. I want general people to read it, not just academics. But every publisher who saw it said कि अरे ये thesis था, तो okay, this will be a little this thing. So people kept offering me other kinds of assignments. So I wrote different books, all my other books came out. The book on walks came out because I was doing heritage walks. I do this in Delhi, and I think that's a lovely way for people to actually understand history. So that was one of the things I started doing. So somebody commissioned a book on that. I wrote two very slim books on Old Delhi and New Delhi. And then finally, when people started realizing that this woman can write in a engaging manner for a regular or readership, they said, "Acha, theek hai, let's publish this book also." So this was the book I think that I always wanted to write on Delhi. It's on 19th century Delhi. It's about the Delhi of very interesting period. It's the end of the Mughals, the last two Mughal emperors, and the East India Company, which begins to rule Delhi and large parts of North India by this time. And how now, and that of course not only North India, they have a bigger footprint, but for this purpose but how they are interacting, what is the kind of complex politics that happens, the culture, we often forget how rich that culture is. But anyway, I'm going ahead of this. But my love on Delhi on many different ways. How I love the look of the city.
Like one word that you would not want to leave Delhi for this.
That list is becoming very small. I find it easier to say why I would like to leave Delhi than air quality. Oh
Yeah,
God, that air quality is really bad. But I've grown up in smaller towns. I've not grown up in a metro. So there are a lot of cultural happenings that tend to, focus around Delhi, which is a wrong thing. I think we should be spreading out, and so I think that list is getting smaller and smaller. But yes, those cultural interactions, those are nice.
Great. So coming to your book, why is it called The Broken Script?
So this is something that I always have a huge problem with deciding on a name. Because किताब तो लिख ली, उसका description भी है, मालूम है कि what the book is about. But how to give it a title? How to give it some sort of... whenever my publisher asks me for feedback, I will give a one-line description of the book. This is what the book is. But किताब का नाम तो ये नहीं हो सकता ना, so you have to think of something. And I said, chalo, let us go with a literary allusion. There is a शेर, उर्दू का शेर है, एक poet थे who was not very well known, somebody called Qadir Bakhsh Sabir. And he was writing this after 1857. 1857 का जो revolt है, उसमें Delhi is very badly hit. And after the revolt is over, the British actually demolished lots of buildings in Delhi. तो ये कादिर बख्श साबिर ने एक शेर लिखा जिसमें he said, बस के बेदाद से टूटे हैं मकान दहली, हो रकम खते शिकस्ता से बयान दहली. उसका मतलब ये है कि इतने unjustly जो दिल्ली के मकान हैं वो टूटे हैं कि हो रकम खते शिकस्ता से बयान दिल्ली. That the story of Delhi should be written in the Shikasta script. Shikasta script is a kind of way of writing. It's a kind of a script of writing, Urdu. It has a broken sort of appearance. So therefore it's called the Shikasta script. So basically वो खते शिकस्ता के ऊपर a broken script. Or kitab, it fits in with the book also in a way, because the book is a story of the broken kind of narrative of the city of Delhi. It's at some levels it is such a fascinating story, but also it is a story of a tragedy, because like as the book unfolds, you realize that there's this incredibly rich and complex culture that is there. And I'm not talking only of the Mughal culture. I'm talking of a very, very complex culture, and I hope we will
Yeah, discuss.
dwell on that a little bit, and how that culture actually comes to an end because of the violence of the revolt of 1857. So that breaking ka jo imagery hai, I think that was something that we wanted to sum up in the
Very,
title.
very interesting. So let's let's start with 1803, and that's what I it you unearthed for most of us is that Mughal did have some sovereignty, and the British did respect. Maybe on surface, but they did respect. Like what we read in the books, it seemed like the British just came and overnight they already the Mughals were very submissive and permissive, and they just let the East India Company be. But it wasn't like that. It was they had some hold. But why did they still have hold? Because two generations were like not very like they weren't they weren't actually ruling, and they have this they have this image of having a very decadent lives and mushairas, and that is what it seemed like that they were doing, but it was not. So can you shed light upon what is actually happening and why and how could they hold on to the court?
Uh, it's very interesting. I think we need to, a little bit of background is needed there to go back into what the Mughal Empire uh, managed to signify for, by the time you come to the early 1800s, what does the Mughal Empire actually stand for? The Mughals have had this, obviously, in the heyday, it was a very powerful empire with huge extent, a lot of influence, a lot of all sorts of resources at its command. It, in the process of that, it develops a sort of a culture of rule, and in the popular imagination, the idea over large parts of India that sovereignty rests with and stems from Delhi, from the Mughal rulers. You know, one thing that I've pointed out in this book, the fact that so many rulers around the country actually issue their coins in the name of the Mughal emperor. Huh? Whether they are the Marathas, whether they are the Rajputs. Of course, there are the successor states which have come from the Mughal polity itself, like Awadh, like Hyderabad. They are all minting coins in the name of the Mughal emperor, because in order to justify their own power as rulers, they carry titles also from the Mughal emperor. The fact that I am I'm a ruler because the Mughal emperor has authorized me to be an emperor. So that idea that actual authority, the root of authority, is with the Mughal emperor was it was a very difficult to get rid of that whole idea. And the British East India Company is very much a part of those several powers which are doing the same thing, because they are also minting their coins in the name of the Mughal emperor. In fact, it's very interesting. Even when the British, so little digression here, the British East India Company captures, of course, its origin. You know, it already has its the Bengal Presidency capital is in Calcutta, but the Bengal Presidency part of the British company is spreading its making inroads into the Doab as well. They captured Delhi after defeating the Maratha forces of Daulat Rao Scindia. So that is also worth understanding, because Delhi at that point was being ruled by Marathas, by Daulat Rao Scindia, in the name of the Mughal emperor. So it's not as if they are rulers in their own name. They are also ruling on the name of the Mughal emperor, but they are the ones who are ruling actually. So The British also, when they come to Delhi, they are using that Mughal name. They feel it necessary to use that Mughal name. क्योंकि अगर Mughal name नहीं use करेंगे, if you won't say that you are ruling on behalf of and in the name of the Mughal emperor, your credibility will go. So, in fact, it's very interesting. The Governor General of the East India Company, till quite late, he used to, when corresponding with uh, other rulers. There were various correspondences with whether it is the Nawab of Awadh, whether it is the ruler of Jaipur, or जिससे भी उनका correspondence होता था. If he's writing his correspondence, that correspondence used to be in Farsi, because in Persian, right? Because Farsi was really the link language, the language of higher administration. Before, like we have in today, English fulfills that role, right? As a language of communication in upper echelons of administration and diplomacy and all that. At that point, it was Farsi, it was Persian. So, in that Persian correspondence of the Governor General, he used to use a seal. In olden days, that used to be they used to seal your letters at the end. Once you finished your writing, you sign and you seal. And that seal used to refer to the Governor General as Fidvi-e Khas of the emperor. Fidvi-e Khas literally means the favored slave of the emperor. So the Governor General used to call himself the favored slave of the Emperor Shah Alam, or whatever, so that to say that I am legitimate, I am favored by the Emperor. So these are things that today it become very difficult for us to understand, that it is a slow process. It is a slow process by which this thing that the erosion sets in. And the erosion really, for those who are staying in Nagpur and maybe have a greater appreciation of Maratha history, this would be of relevance, is that the changing point comes after the end of the Anglo-Maratha wars. 1818, the last of the three so-called Anglo-Maratha wars happens. You have the end of that. And from that period onwards, the British say, we are now masters of North India. We are now masters of North and Central India. Now we don't need to bother about the Mughal emperor. And tab se they start to then slowly ye fidvi wala business. They stop minting the coins in the name of the emperor. They are always also trying to encourage other rulers to to give up that whole. So they for instance they come to the Nawab of Awadh. They say, declare yourself a ruler. Why are you still going on with this idea that you are a wazir of the Mughal emperor, right? You become a ruler in your own name. And then the Nawabs of Awadh also take this title of Shah rather than being just Nawab Wazir. कहते थे उनको.
So they were very, very strategic, and I think divide and rule at the get-go that they did. So, like another layman, and like how, because that's what we read in the history, and that's what our perception is, and I spoke to you about it yesterday also. Mughal had their sovereignty, they had some amount of control, they could have used it. The Jains had a lot of money, and they were lending it to the British for war against Indians, the Marathas, the Plasi war. So, can we blame the British rule to the Mughals then and the bankers then?
I think that's a very interesting question, and I think it's a very complex issue. The problem happens that seated as we are today in a modern nation state called India, with particular boundaries and as a entity that is there, we sometimes forget that when you look back at the past, you cannot project this Indian nation back into the past, whatever may be. This India that we have today, you cannot project it back and say, कि अरे ये Indians थे हमारे ancestors, why did they allow these outsiders to come in and rule? Why did they allow the British to come in and rule? Why did they tolerate over them, etc.? I think we need to take a little break here and think about. I think I'm fine. I think it's working. Yeah. Thank you. I think we need to put that in perspective. Huh? When you are, suppose you're a Dilli wala. You're a Dilli wala or Dilli wali who is living in Delhi in the 18th century. 1750 में आप रह रहे हैं. For you, you are kind of ruled by the Mughal emperor is there. By that time, the Mughal empire was a bit in decline, but it was kind of there. Mughal emperor himself was in exile, but then he comes back. But he comes back with Maratha help, and the Marathas are the actual rulers of the city. So, for somebody like that to think of your main thing is who is your ruler. Your place is your place, which is Delhi. There is no wider nation to which you owe your loyalty. There is not that idea of nationhood to which you look. You have your own multiple identities. You are a Delhi person. You may have your religious identity. You may have your cultural identity in other ways. You may have all these overlapping identities. You may have linguistic identities. But the idea that you belong to a larger nation is not there. You owe your loyalty to your immediate overlord, whoever rules over you, whatever. And the fact that a legitimate regime change, today how do governments change? We use our democratic right. Now think about it. Before this modern system of electing our rulers, etc., what was a legitimate way of regime change? Conquest. You conquer a place, you become its legitimate ruler, right? So from the perspective of somebody sitting in Delhi in the 18th century, the fact that the Mughal emperor gives the Marathas the authority to rule on his behalf makes them legitimate rulers. But for the Delhi-wide Marathas also are kind of outsiders in some way, right? And the Marathas also, you must realize that when the Marathas are ruling Delhi, it is not Maratha rule in that sense. Marathas, okay, the Marathas are it's Daulat Rao Scindia. But who are the people who is ruling through? So it's very interesting that the governor of Delhi during some of that part was somebody called Shah Nizamuddin. So he's one from the local Delhi nobility who's ruling. The Kotwal of Delhi at that time, during the Maratha rule, the last Kotwal of Delhi at that point was somebody called Major La Marchand, who is a Frenchman. The Marathas actually employed a lot of Frenchmen. And he's a French Kotwal. So you are looking at a place which is very multicultural. An ethos that is multicultural. They don't have these kind of categories कि ये foreigner है तो ये हमारा कोतवाल नहीं हो सकता. Kotwal was the highest highest police official in the city. He was in charge of the police department. Today, I think in Delhi, that would be the commissioner of Delhi police or something, and you have your equivalents here also. So the idea that when the British East India Company comes in, 1803 mein, they defeat the Marathas, they become rulers of Delhi. For the people of Delhi, this is a legitimate regime change. उन्होंने conquer किया है. They are our new rulers. And how do you can of course question them. If you are not happy, you can question them also. And the big questioning happens in 1857, as we will see. But they are your rulers. So the idea that why they are allowing this, and if you look at the Mughals, the process of erosion of their power, their actual power, apart from this symbolic thing I've talked about, is a long process. Much before the coming of the East India Company to Delhi, that power is already gone. So, but of course, another aspect is that sometimes we forget, while that power had gone, there's also, I think we should not fall into the trap of some of the British writing that has happened on this case, which is to depict the Mughal emperors as decadent, as debauched, and generally inefficient. Why? They failed as rulers because they were not, in fact, a lot of taking a cue from that colonial writing, I think a lot of Indian writing has also talked about the Mughals as if Bahadur Shah Zafar sirf mushaira hi karta rehta tha. He used to be sitting and doing his mushairas and doing some spiritual things, and that was it. And that's not what makes a good ruler. You must realize that the Mughals, they were victims of what had gone on. These are greater processes that they had no control over often, which had led to the decline of the empire. But as individuals, they still did quite a lot, that at least tried hard to be aware of what was going on and to work to limited extents against that. So, for instance, you have the first of the main two Mughal emperors which figure in this book, Akbar II. He had various grievances against the British East India Company, the fact that they had gone back on many promises that they had made to him. He sends an envoy, he sends an ambassador to Britain. And that ambassador is Raja Ram Mohan Roy. In fact, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who's the great Bengal reformer, his title Raja is something that the Mughal emperors had given him. So that's why he's called Raja. Even more interesting is somebody who has actually forgotten in this. Bahadur Shah Zafar, he also sent an envoy. And look at him, he decides to send as his envoy somebody who was a prominent anti-slavery activist in US and Britain, somebody called George Thompson. Now, George Thompson comes to Calcutta. He is invited by Dwarkanath Tagore, who's a big industrialist there. And this guy, George Thompson, is also very instrumental in founding the British India Association in Britain, right? So he's sympathetic to Indian causes, Indian grievances that are there. He wants to bring attention to them. How the East India Company is misruling and exploiting Indians and all that. So Bahadur Shah hears about this man, sends his wazir to Calcutta to bring this man to Delhi. He comes to Delhi. Bahadur Shah explains, please carry my cause to Britain. And he sends him as an ambassador to Britain, George Thompson. So I'm just trying to say that this is a man, Bahadur Shah is a man who is very much aware of what's going on in the world around him. What are the important issues? Who are the kinds of people who are, embracing causes that he is interested in, or he finds some sort of connect with, and using those. So to say that this man is living in some sort of out of sync with the times, he's living in the past, he's only writing poetry, all that is actually quite misleading. So I think an important part of my book was also to bring out these complexities that are there in these Mughal emperors.
Yeah, and you really, everyone, I think, tried with because of their limited resources, they used it to their limit.
Yeah.
They used all their resources to fight back to the British, and I think the businessmen. It was business as usual for them because
Yes. Again, you talked about the Jain merchants, for instance. Today, if you look at some of the Jain merchants, you'll say, my goodness, these are anti-national people. Why are they financing the East India Company? Why are they not financing the Marathas, for instance? But again, as I say, we have to look and put it in context. This is no nation. These are often business decisions that they are making, right? That if there is a face-off between two powers, who do you think is likely to win? And you support them because that's a good business decision to go with somebody who will then be able to, and they do well out of it, because some of them, they get lands, they get jagirs, they get positions in the government treasury and stuff like that. So these are, as I said, we should not project our standards of what is a nation, what is national, back into that is ahistorical.
but then No, it's very natural that we
Yeah,
do. Like,
of
how
course.
the elites started working for the British and they're like, oh, the elites were the collaborators.
Yeah, yeah,
But we have to take the
yeah,
context.
yeah.
Again, like, you have, this book is exhaustive, but it is very, very interesting because you have painted pictures of James Skinner and Master Ramchandra, and you can hear the printing press and you can see those mushairas of Ghalib. How tedious was it, or how interesting, or how easy was the research? Because the Mughals and the British did a lot of documentation. So how easy or how difficult was it?
It was, it, it took me 7 years to do this PhD. And of course, writing the book itself was another process also. Uh, it took me a long time. And that's partly because I needed to learn Urdu. So I needed to learn Urdu, and then when I learned Urdu, my reading speed was quite slow. So I have used a whole variety of sources. I've used, of course, the official documents. Many of them are in the British uh, colonial
Archives.
files, etc. But I read a lot of letters. I read a lot of published things like tazkiras, which are biographical notes of the poets, a lot of letters, a lot of poetry, a whole variety of things I read in order to put this book together. So obviously, it took a very, very long time to research it. But you are very right that I have tried to bring in. Now, one thing that I always feel is that when I like to look at a city as like Delhi, if I'm looking at a particular period, I think that you cannot understand, say, the culture without looking at the politics of the time. And you can't look at the politics of the time without looking at the other things, culture, how society is moving, what is happening. So for me, that was a very important part of it because ultimately it is a book about the culture of the period. And this and that aspect, apart from the politics of it, is a period where there is a very rich interaction. Again, there are some stereotypes about Delhi in this period, and those stereotypes are that this is an old culture. This is the culture of Ghalib and Momin and Zauq and all those wonderful poets who are writing poetry. Sometimes we forget that this is also the period of a lot of new thinking that is happening. So you have the rise of the printing press, with that the rise of modern print journalism, which is very active in Delhi. And one person who is involved with that is Muhammad Bakr, who is a very fascinating person. And I mention him in my book, of course, in some
Even
detail.
Kamruddin has made so much of it. Even
Sorry.
Kamruddin, for the
Yeah,
printing
very
press,
good.
he was
Yes,
like,
yes.
so it was,
But Muhammad Bakir, for instance, is
yes,
one of the first people to articulate the drain of wealth theory
yes.
in context before Dadabhai Nauroji, where he hints at it. Dadabhai Nauroji, of course, developed it more in more detail. And you have person like Master Ramchandar, who was an original thinker in mathematics. He published material. He was interested in popularizing science. He was interested in popularizing science in the vernacular tongue. So these are very, very interesting developments that are happening. This is the forming of colonial modernity. Whenever we think of, the kinds of modernity that we have today, that we take for as parts of our package, we often, I think, belittle it by thinking that this is all colonial. Ye colonialism ki deen hai. This is something that has come to us with colonialism. We forget that in the development of this modernity, how much, even in the colonial period, it was the Indians who were participating and contributing to this colonial modernity. To look at the great achievements of Indian thinkers, uh, great Indian minds who have contributed to what we are today, we don't necessarily only have to look back to ancient India. Look at the 19th century. Look at these people. Look at, for instance, there are people like Ziauddin Ahmad and Sayyid Ahmad
Sayyid
Khan
Ahmad
who
Khan.
actually are important members of the Delhi Archaeological Society, which is a precursor to the archaeological survey of Delhi Archaeological Society. So, these are amazing things that are happening, which are being shaped by Indian people. वो बात अलग है कि when the colonials wrote their memoirs and journals and all that, often they sidelined these Indian figures from those writings. But they are there. They are very much there. It's not as if all this work is being done only by British people, British scholars, British administrators. There's a huge. So I think that was a very important part of my.
Yeah, I mean that made it so personal because you have some personal, you have described their personal lives also. Then it's not a fleeting address to these people, and which that's what I suggest to the readers that it is a really interesting read because it takes you back. It's like a time machine, and especially that hourly description that you have given about the day of the revolt itself. So I'm sure readers are going to have a very nice time reading this, and something which was never talked about, or I don't think much will be talked about it, because now it's all about past, because everybody has, like, for us the history began with the revolt. It was a Sepoy mutiny, and that's how the history books start with. Like we spoke about, like how it was very amazed that newsletters were around, and then started newspapers were around, printing press had come, and also with that you mentioned that there were advertisements, there were already plagiarism, there were already fake news. So some things don't change, but how did printing press really make that impact on the society then, and which is still carried on, like?
Printing is a very, yeah, I mean, it helps to diffuse. It has a lot of impacts in the literary sphere, because one of the things I've talked about it, how it leads to a democratization of poetry writing. Earlier, poetry writing was a very elite activity. It is only a few great ustads and their shagirds who are doing this poetry writing. Printing press and the creation of multiple tazkiras, multiple in fact, some of the tazkiras are actually almost a manual for writing poetry. So that greater democratization of the process happens. The modern newspapers are made possible because earlier the handwritten newspapers, which were akhbars, were very kind of limited things. They were limited to say things like the news of the politics of the day. But these become, the modern newspaper brings in a lot of discussions about culture, about social change. All of those things begin to happen because of and of course, I've talked about Karimuddin. You'll have to read the book to get that story. Very interesting
Very
man
interesting.
who starts kind of a print mushaira. but these are interesting people. He writes, in fact, one of the first books, manuals for women's, how women should be modern and progressive, and not modern and progressive. He doesn't put it that way, but how they can have values and skills to
Like
make
you
them.
had this, it's called Talimu Nisa, and how you had these probably manuals for homemakers, how to be a good housewife kinds. So it was around even that time, which was pretty interesting because you don't think about that time having books and having newspapers also. So Delhi, as you mentioned, was getting very modern. It was already very cosmopolitan, different nationalities, different religions. It was a land of Urdu, and it had the Delhi University was a Urdu university. So, and then suddenly there was a divide. There was this Oriental college, and then there was this English college. Did Urdu take the hit of modernity, the cosmopolitanism?
I think even in the history of the Delhi College, which is, it starts off as, it's a very interesting thing because it has, on the one hand, teaching, it has the Oriental section where the medium of instruction is Urdu, and then there's the English section where the medium of instruction is English. Increasingly, it's very interesting, people want to learn English. And why do they want to learn English? Master Ramchandar, etc., are all for using the native tongues. They are saying, you know, if you want to really popularize science or other, you have to learn you have to teach it in the local language so people will understand it. But those who are joining the Delhi College, they are joining because they want to learn English, because they want to get a good government job, right? So I think those things haven't changed. The idea still is that English opens to you new worlds. And whether you like it or not, to some extent, that is true. The fact that we are sitting and discussing these things in English, we have always, as I said, needed a link language. We have so many different mother tongues in this country. We need one common language, which is not one person, not any section's language. It's a neutral language. So we've used English. Before that, we used Farsi in that same way. So therefore, that also it's a thing. There are these idealists who like Master Ramchandar who say Urdu में सिखाना चाहिए, but वो होता नहीं है.
हाँ, मतलब अब उर्दू थोड़े एक मतलब एक community or it's just stuck to a community now. It become more like a community language, though it was not like again Delhi anybody would talk in Urdu. Like for Ghalib, he would write in Urdu and call it Hindi because
For them, there's no difference in the two.
in the two, and right now it's like a different language and it's totally non-existent unless it's a community. And that's what my question was, like what happened, like why did
Why?
Urdu disappear? Like it was British mechanicians, yes, because they were employing people who would want and then there was like signboards in English and all happening, but then why did Urdu get so
I think
small?
Urdu has not retreated in the face of English. In the face of English, a lot of Indian languages obviously have remained. Actually, they've remained vernacular. They have remained regional languages and languages of various regions and important languages of regions. Urdu has retreated in the face of a new development which came in the second half of the 19th century, which is the rise of modern Hindi as distinct from what was a common Hindi. When Ghalib writes of his language, he calls it Hindi. He calls his language Hindi
But
because
it's all
that
Urdu.
is Hindi. But from the second half of the 19th century begins this movement, which is in part a political movement to say, okay, no, this is not Hindi. If you want Hindi, you have to purge it of all Farsi words, all Arabic words, which, by the way, other languages in India haven't done that. Huh? So I'm not familiar with Marathi, but I'm very familiar with Bengali. And Bengali has so many Farsi words that in it as a very natural part of the language, which nobody has fortunately thought of weeding out. So it's the weeding out process which created this kind of new Hindi that was to come up, right?
And
So
that took over Urdu.
yeah, so that became obviously the dominant register. But again, हम लोग जब आपस में बात करते हैं, what we are speaking is that old
Mostly
Hindi only.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So we are a little out of time.
Yeah,
I would like to touch upon the revolt and a part of your book because Delhi, like what I read, first half of it, most of it was like a seat of culture, art, literature, Ghalib, and poetry. And then, would you like to read the how did this vacuum come about?
Okay,
The how this transition became and why is Delhi now known for the thugs and the badmash and not about the art and culture as much? So
Okay, sorry. I think no.
about this, how
So there is this great the idea that what happened in 1857 was 1857 destroys Delhi in many ways. The Delhi College is destroyed. The Mughal court is exiled. The Delhi Archaeological Society is finished. So huge. And many of the people migrate. Many are killed, of course, also. So there is a lot of just a minute. So there were, I'm sorry. So what happens is that with the destruction of all of this also comes many of these things then later get revived in other places. There is the literary changes that were taking place. Then the focus moves to Lahore. When Lahore, there's a uh, Anjuman, Lahore Anjuman, which starts the new kind of writing of Urdu. There is the Archaeological Survey of India, which builds on what the Archaeological Society of Delhi had done without acknowledging it. Huh? So, what happens is that it is almost three, it says, and what happens is that after all this intellectual change, the intellectual developments that were happening in this period are they're carried forward, but the Delhi roots are forgotten. People forget that this was first happened in Delhi. So the so-called Delhi Renaissance. There's C.F. Andrews, who's called Deen Bandhu Andrews, great freedom fighter in India's cause. He called it the Delhi Renaissance, and and to that extent, it's a question of a lost world that happens. Um, I this is how I end my book. I first became interested in research into the company period in Delhi's history because I was intrigued and puzzled by what I read. Paradoxically, it was a period much written about and yet relatively unknown to readers of history. Its cultural and intellectual life had been written about in cliches that were as contradictory as they were simplistic. It was simultaneously viewed as a cultural high point and an age of decay. It was characterized sometimes as a period of twilight, at others as a renaissance, and as if to somehow reconcile the two, as the last bright flicker of a candle before it goes out. A closer study revealed that complexities that characterized this period. Behind the cliches was a vibrant and dynamic culture embarking on a process of far reaching changes, at least some of them impelled by the interaction between Western education and thought on the one hand, and a strong tradition of language, literature, and learning on the other. Some of them were the product of a lived reality of a contest between a once powerful dynasty and a newly rampant political order. And finally, some were the result of social change brought about by the changing class and community balances. So that it's about how people get to adapt to colonial change, how people's thinking adapts. It's very interesting. Ghalib, who's very much a part of the traditional old culture, in one of his letters, talks about he remembers the Gregorian date, the date, the English way of writing dates, and he has forgotten the Hijri date. So he's forgotten okay, what day is it according to the Hijri calendar, which is quite something, the fact that even that at that time, so much is the new colonial structure ingrained in ways of thinking that you have forgotten the older forms. So it is a very sort of interesting period of Delhi's history.
So, last question, which she's been indicating. Because we're all here and you've done this heritage walk. So, what is a beginner's walk that you suggest to everybody, like a non-Delhiite taking up your book and going for a walk? Which is the walk that we should pick up first on?
Well, since we've been talking about broken script, लाल किले का walk या चांदी चौक का walk करना चाहिए. That is a discussion, however, about another book, which is
Yes. So there's
I
this
have a book
the
called 14 Historic
Wars.
Walks in Delhi.
So I wanted to touch on the Shahjahanabad also, but then maybe not. But I still wanted to take up on because this, what I have read the book, it's quite like a manual. You can just take up the book and start off, and it's very interestingly and very detailedly written. So then you suggest us to take the Red Fort walk.
Yeah, Red Fort Walk or the Chandni Chowk Walk.
Chandni Chowk
Yeah,
walk. As a
definitely.
non-Delhiite, it will
Yeah,
be
so some of
easier,
these places that will.
which is discussed. So now we'll open the, uh, for audience. There's this extra mic. If you want.
Any questions?
Thank you, ma'am. Your wonderful talk. I remember my Delhi University classes, Amar Farooqi sirs. I remember my Amar Faruqi sir classes on 1857 and Delhi histories. My question regarding what was the nature of Mughal education policies toward lower startup society and women, apart from Hindu upper caste and elite Muslim?
Sorry, I'm not getting that.
My question repeat, what was the nature of Mughal education policy towards the lower startup society,
Mughal what policy?
education policies
Right.
towards lower startup society and women apart from Hindu dominant classes and Muslim elite?
Uh, I'm sorry, this is not a part of my period of research because at the time that I'm doing my research, the Mughals had no role in education at all. Education is a part of the East India Company's. Sorry.
Go through it your book and you discuss about new paradigm of education
Yeah, under the East India Company, not the Mughals.
and also discuss the Hindus Education Institute and Muslim Institute. What was their complexity and vested interest?
Uh, well, the Muslims and Hindus were obviously, as I said, the main aim of joining the Delhi College is to get a good job. There are some who
Yeah,
are
certainly.
inspired by those kind of things. But yeah, I mean, by and large, you see, there were a lot of madrasas that were available, which were also teaching kind of higher education, though a different kind of education. So a lot of the Muslims went to those. A lot of the Muslim nobility actually had teachers come home to teach the students. So a lot of the students, and more than half of the students, were actually Hindus and Jains. Kayasths were very important in that. The Kayasth students were very prominent in that, for instance.
So, what do you mean by culture? Is it between Hindu and Muslim complexity or within a Hindu startup society?
Sorry, I'm. What do I?
See, we would like to take up questions based on this book only, not her other books also.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
This
So
this doesn't include what you are saying.
complexity is very,
Yeah.
by its very nature, complex, and even that category of Hindu is something that we are, or Muslim is something that we are imposing on it. If you actually read the book, you realize how much there are different categories that people are thinking in terms of. So.
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am. The last question by Priyanka was, how did this Delhi become from a city of culture and poetry to a city of thugs? How did this happen? Why did this happen? So I just would like to.
The revolt of 1857 has a big role to play in that. It destroyed this old culture. And by old culture, I don't mean the Mughal culture only, but this culture of vibrant intellectual questioning and change and vibrancy. It destroyed that quite physically by the destruction of institutions, and some of the important people were killed. Muhammad Baqir, for instance, the journalist, he's executed after 1857. So there are people who are killed, and many of them migrate outside. So a lot of the prominent Delhi people migrate to Lahore, for instance. There are people who migrate to Rampur. So they go away. So Delhi becomes a sort of a intellectual backwater for a bit. The trade aspect still survives, but politically also it is removed to a backwater. It becomes a part of Punjab province, and it does not really begin to pick up until the early in 1912, when abruptly the British decide that they will move the capital from Calcutta to Delhi. So that begins a slow revival again. But there's a huge period of, as you say,
And there's this eruption of these actually people who were called Badmash, the notorious people, and they were helping British, and they yeah.
That's another interesting story about the Delhi mob, like the say the Parisian mob during the French Revolution. That's the story of 1857, but another time.
Yeah, this student here. Achha.
Hello, ma'am. Two cities, or I might say three cities of India are darlings of authors. besides Delhi, Varanasi, and Kolkata. Like there are so many authors, historians, philosophers, religious writers, tourists, literary writers have written on these
Yeah,
three
yeah.
cities. Normally, what happens is if someone wants to visit Varanasi, he would refer a book on Varanasi. If somebody wants to visit Calcutta, he would even this is applicable to foreign travelers also, foreigners also. But suppose somebody wants to visit Delhi as a tourist, he won't refer a book on Delhi. Uh, Writing on Delhi has mostly remained academic writing. Besides Khushwant Singh's and some other popular writers, can you please explain me why does this happen?
Um, um, Maybe you haven't read a lot of books on Delhi, but there's a lot of, yeah.
Why would somebody not read? Like, I have read books on books and books on Varanasi. It's not about me, it's about the overall writings on three darling cities Kolkata, Varanasi, and Delhi.
Right. So, I have bookshelves full of Delhi writings. So, yeah, no, but about Delhi. So, for instance, somebody's written about the Delhi Ridge, somebody's written on trees of Delhi, people have written on birds of Delhi. It depends on what your interests are. It's also very difficult to sum up one city as complex as Delhi in one book that I would say read this if you are interested in Delhi, because there's so many aspects of Delhi and they have all been written about actually. So, for somebody who's visiting Delhi as a tourist, I would say if you're interested in the monuments of Delhi, take my books, 14 Historic Walks, go and explore some of the monuments on your own. So that's one of the ways of doing
Yeah,
it.
and her other book, like one covers the old Delhi, which is Chandni Chowk, and the new Delhi, Connaught Place. So I think that you would find what interests you. I mean, you'll have to look for it probably. Yeah.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm actually studying grade 8th, and we are talking about British rule, the EIC company the company coming into India from Bengal. So I wanted to ask that the British had a lot of ways to annex kingdoms, like diplomatic ways, cultural ways, etc. So, like the diplomatic ways, doctrine of lapse, subsidiary alliance, like were these used to outsmart the kings and queens, or like were it just like it was it to make themselves look a more higher sovereign than the other?
Yeah. So, very simple. All the bottom line here is if you are more powerful, you will defeat the more weaker. And then once you have defeated them, you enter into some sort of treaty with them. And then once you have entered into the treaty also, it's not as if that is the last word. So if you feel that your power is actually now growing even more and the defeated power is going even less, then you use other kind of then you add other things like this doctrine of lapse, etc. So ultimately it's all about power. It's about how powerful the British rule gets vis-a-vis many Indian powers. I mean, that's a very, very simple way of putting it, but that is it.
One last question.
The student there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let the kids.
We can take others during the lunch break or something also. Yeah.
The kids will leave, so we
Yeah,
can take.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll take.
Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is, did Delhi get affected from being a metropolis after the revolt of 1857 and after revolts? Because if it would be affected, then the whole country can be affected because of that.
Well, what the main thing with Delhi has grown after 1947. It's really, really grown, huh? And the metropolis business has happened much later, of course, than the subject of this book. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great idea. I think we should be thinking of moving some of those things out. I mean, we should not be concentrating everything into Delhi, mainly for various other reasons, including quality of life in Delhi itself.
All right, one last question.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. Actually, my question is the book you have written, have you visited those places and why you have chosen Delhi to write?
Yeah. I am very familiar with Delhi. I love Delhi as a place also, but I love it as a as a historian also, and that those two things are a little different, because I mean, you know, my historical insight is not about love of a particular period or of any people. It's just a more it's a desire to look into the past and see what happened here.
Thank you,
So
ma'am.
thank you very much. Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Priyanka, and
Thank you
so much
so
for your
much. It
time.
was a wonderful, wonderful session. I hope all of you enjoyed. If you have more questions, if you would like to interact with her, she is available here at the Authors Lounge. She will be signing her book outside near Labanum and outside Authors Lounge.
Books are
for the next few
available at the
minutes.
crossword
Yes.
stall. You can pick up and get it signed and even speak to her.
Yeah. And I would like to invite Mr. Amardeep Singh. Please don't miss out this amazing documentary by him that we are going to showcase tomorrow. I'd like to invite him to present a token of appreciation to Swapna ma'am. This is a specially made frame of a monument from Nagpur.